I will tell you that I was expecting to have been here about 9:30 this morning. Don't know quite what's going on yet. But having a plan B, C, and D is always the move. That we're going to Burns right now. And as he shows or not shows, then we'll adjust our schedule out. So tell me about burns. They hurt.
Or they don't.
Or, well, they always will, and I'll explain why. Tell me about burns. Stinky, yeah. So you get that smell of third-degree burn in your mind, and the scent of it will never go away. It's always there. Tell me about burns.
You don't.
So there's full thickness, partial thickness, you said.
It's not just from.
A lot of fluid loss. Yeah. So they set you up for hypothermia here, bleed.
They can be caused by a large variety of mechanisms.
So something outside of a thermal burn, it can be just as deadly as something else in terms of thermal burns, right? And one of the things we'll talk about, do you know within a structure fire what kills your patient? Typically it's not the burn itself. It's not the idea in terms of superheated gases. What is it? It's they breathe it in terms of all those materials we just got finished talking about the last hour. That's the killer. It's not the superheated airway. It is the rest of the airway in terms of junk they're taking in.
Well, most of the patients are dead prior to them even burning up, correct?
Not always.
Not always?
Not by numbers, no.
Okay.
Okay? Tell me about burns.
Airway management is key.
A huge airway management. This is the one type of patient that you can have an effect on. This is the one type of patient that you can do some dramatic things about. Okay? Tell me about burns.
Circumferential is always terrible.
So just so we're all talking the same language, Charlie, what is circumferential?
You can go around the entire your chest or your arm.
So what would it result in? You're right. What would it result in?
Constriction of
Also known as compartment syndrome. It's just one more way of thinking about compartment syndrome in terms of the likes of it, okay? So let's go. There's a lot here to talk about, so let's kind of dive into this. Here's where we're going. We're going to describe the anatomy of a burn injury. We're going to talk and review types of burn injuries. We're going to talk about classification of a burn injury. We're going to try to improve our proficiency in terms of how to treat it. So you as an ALS provider can have a bearing in terms of what you're going to do and how you're going to manage these patients in each way. So just by the numbers, this slide presentation is probably, I don't know, probably 7 or 8 years old, so the numbers are probably greater than this, but somewhere around 500,000 or so that are burned every single year, requiring hospitalization. And I'm sure above and beyond that, there's still a bunch out there that don't receive first aid, or at least for very long. Of this, 35% of burns are life-threatening. So in the overall scheme of things, we were talking about trauma centers yesterday, right? So the overall scheme of things, it's not a high number, unless you happen to be one of those 3 to 5%, right? That is a huge number in terms of that possibility. Why are the youngest, why are the oldest, and why are the immunosuppressed most at risk?
Can't get out of the house fast enough? Or no?
That's not why they're at risk.
Oh.
Kids have smaller surface area.
So kids have smaller surface area, yes. What was that? There you go. There's a starting point. Immune system is everything in burns. Because of why? Yes, but why? Yes, but why?
Your barrier's gone.
There you go. So the skin's gone. The skin we talked about as being the largest organ a long, long time ago as being the thing that's going to protect you the most. Okay? When that's gone, then everything else rushes in terms of population. So think about the immunosuppressed, think about the old, think about the young, and those are the setups in terms of who we're talking about here. Second leading cause of death in children under 12 years of age. Why?
Silly stuff.
What was that?
They do silly stuff.
Yeah, so the idea that they're always reaching for something, right up on the stove or the lights on or checking it out in terms of whatever this is, the idea that you have 3, 4, 5-year-olds that are a setup, okay? So why else, on the dark side of life, why else is this age group at highest risk? Abuse. in a huge, huge way, okay? We'll talk about it a little bit today, but we'll talk about it as we get into P, later in life. The good news is that there's a national decline in burn mortality. Why, firefighters?
More smoke
Prevention,
detectors.
education, and most importantly, smoke detectors, right? Smoke detectors have made a huge difference. I don't know that this is necessarily true safer construction techniques, maybe on the exterior, but in terms of the stuff that's being contained within the house or within the office building, not so much there. That probably work. So what's part of the burn? Everything. It can be the airway, it can be the skin, it can be the muscle, the bone, the organ, systemic effect, and physiologic effect. Have you had the opportunity of interacting with any patients who have been burned severely after the fact? And I'm talking about months and months and years after the fact. Okay? What's life like for them? Why?
The woman I'm thinking about lit herself on fire, her face, they can't function the same. They lose. Lady lost her eyes. She lost her ability to basically breathe on her own.
Okay. What's just something else?
Doesn't their skin become harder and
Yep.
less pliable?
Yep.
It's just-
So even as skin grafts, we always talk about skin grafts, as skin grafts are in play, the idea that it does not sew back to the original thing. Is it a huge improvement over the burn itself? Absolutely. But the idea that they're just disfigured, the idea that they stand out in society because of that is part of what they go through every single day. So big deal. How many layers are there to skin? You should know this. What are they? So what gets affected in terms of burns is dependent on the classification and severity of the burn, right? The idea that all three can be in play. But the idea that all that has to happen is the epidermis gets shed away and you start having the barrier break down for the possibility of infection. Okay, so it doesn't take a whole lot. So tell me some things about the epidermis, dermis, and the subcutaneous.
It's the outer layer.
And,
It's where you get your first degree burn.
and, just tell me about the skin layers itself, not about the burn.
It helps, it helps.
Dermis is the tough mother, right? The idea that dermis is the middle layer. What else about those hair follicles and those subcutaneous glands? Say again? Nerve endings is where? You all don't sound sure. So let's talk about it then. Epidermis, outer layer of the skin, no blood vessels or glands, 4 different types of cell layers, thick covering most of the body. 5 different cell layers on the palms of the soles. Why? Because of use, okay? By design, by whatever it was, the idea in terms of those cells, we have a thicker lining on the hands and feet. The idea that there's always, and we talked about this back with AMP review, the idea that there's a new cell regeneration that's going on every single day is part of the good news for us. The dermis, middle layer, contains the following structures. And I'll look you right, and then we'll talk. Yep.
Can you turn that maybe different light?
I don't know. Is it good? Does it help?
Yeah, thank you.
A lot better. What's this laundry list saying to you?
This is the most important thing.
It's certainly the work portion of the skin, right? The idea that when we get a partial full thickness burn, we're talking about the other layer. And so think of all the things that go by the wayside based on sweat glands, or nerve fibers, or hair follicles. Again, we talk about hair follicles. What's that all about? What's the reason that we have hairy arms? Say it again, John?
Heat regulation.
There you go, thermal regulation. So the idea that when you start doing something simple like burning off hair follicles, the idea is your thermal regulation goes out the, no pun intended, out through the breezes to hypothermia. Ooh. So subcutaneous layer. Between the dermis and the underlying muscles. So the idea that when we start getting into a full thickness burns, we're talking about getting into the subcutaneous level. And it's actually some burns that are so severe that they'll burn right into the bone itself, into the muscle itself, depending on the heat of it. Thickness varies from person to person, location of the body. The idea that you have this little frail lady with not a whole lot of subcutaneous skin is going to be a setup in terms of not only infection, but also if she ends up getting burned. Contains large blood vessels and nerves. So the idea that if we have a partial thickness and full thickness burn, the idea that when it starts getting into this level, there's going to be severe issues as far as circulation throughout the body.
Is this where most of your primary veins are?
Yep. Yep. So what if lymphatic vessels get damaged? What's the big deal on that? We talked about it. It's the immune system, right? It's a collection of garbage. If it can no longer filter, the idea that that's a setup for sepsis, an overwhelming sepsis, just based on little things like that. So within that, underlying structures would include the muscles, the fascia, the nerves, the tendons, the bones, it goes on and on and on and on. So we talked about the skin already, but the idea that it's a barrier, it insulates, it protects, regulation of body temperature, water balance, weight, sensation, this is all stuff that you should know. Should be any surprises there. But without it, it's a setup for a lot of different problems. It keeps you busy. And again, there shouldn't be a whole lot of surprises here on this slide either, except for maybe this one. Why would your patient be acidotic simply because of issues with skin?
Just sweat out properly.
That's part of it.
Well, when you kill tissue, it releases a bunch of stuff into your bloodstream, right?
There you go.
Free
So the idea that you go from aerobic metabolism to an anaerobic metabolism simply based on loss of skin structure.
Are you saying that's a continuous thing for burn patients throughout their life after they've been burned?
I wouldn't say after life, I would just say until they can somehow get that skin covered and taken care of again.
Okay.
I gotta take off, I haven't heard from
Yeah,
Joel
okay.
or anything like that.
I'll pursue it.
I'll be back, yeah,
All right.
I'll be back
See
this
you.
afternoon.
All right.
This is during the active phase.
Yes,
Burns what you're
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about.
So this is huge. This is something we're going to talk about Parkland burn formula here in a little bit. The idea in terms of loss of this right here is a setup in terms of what's going to happen to them next. And so as we start talking about IV therapy on these patients, it's a big deal. So the old stop, drop, and roll, right?
Drop and cover.
There you go. Thermoburns causes damage by increasing the rate at which molecules within the object move and collide with each other. Fancy way of saying the electrolytes are going to be a huge problem in terms of this. Result of extreme heat exposure is progressive injury and cell death. Interesting thing about burn patients is that many do not die in the first 24 hours. Even with severe burns, they don't die in the first 24 hours, but over a period of time. So last week we were talking about shock, right? We were talking about the three different stages of shock: compensated, decompensated, and irreversible. And then there's multiple organ failure. The idea that burn patients typically will end up in multiple organ failure over a long period of time. Days, months. I knew of a guy, didn't know him personally, didn't take care of him or anything else like that. But I know of a guy when I was stationed up in North Dakota years and years ago that worked on the oil rigs. Him and his brother were firefighters, volunteer firefighters, and they both got burned severely. They were flown down to Brooke Army Medical Hospital in Houston, which is one of the world's renowned places for burns. One brother was there for 9 months, the other brother ended up dying at 12 months. And so the idea that burn patients will typically hang out for a long, long period of time and then end up dying secondary to infection. And especially thermal burns. The extent of burn injury relates to the amount of heat energy transferred to the skin, which makes sense in terms of burn surface area, right? The temperature, the concentration of the heat energy possesses, and the length of contact time within the skin. So Jackson's theory of thermal wounds, you should know this. Jackson's theory of thermal wounds. I'm gonna get some throat off here, I'll be right back.
So Captain Obvious's theory of thermal running? Closest to heat source has the worst energy?
So the inverse really,
Oh,
the hotter it is, the safer you are.
So tell me about Jackson's theory of thermal wounds.
the closer you are to the heat, the more damage you get.
Not necessarily closer to the heat, but the areas surrounding the burn is what we're talking about, okay?
Well, somebody was saying the difference is common sense.
That's a much better way to put it.
Yes, common sense in terms of closest to the burn, absolutely, but the idea of what they're talking about is the zones of what happens, okay? Let me see if they have another slide, otherwise we're just gonna talk about it. There we go. So, 3 different zones. The zones of hyperemia, the zone of coagulation, the zone of stasis, okay? Tell me about this 3.
It's like a hot, warm, cold zone kind of
Kind
thing.
of like, well, so what happens within those 3 zones?
So if you lose the zone of.
That's what I was just saying.
What's that?
What'd you say?
So if you lose the zone of hyperemia, no, never mind. So in the zone of coagulation, that's where your blood clots, if you get down in there, you're gonna have a hard time with clotting factors
Right.
and maintaining. And then the zone of stasis is basically the homeostasis for your body, so you get down there, start losing more elements to maintain homeostasis.
Okay. So to that, here's what we're talking about, folks. John, you're right in terms of the area surrounding the burn. You're right. But the idea in terms of what happens is directly related to the burn itself, and then areas away from it, and then areas further away from it as well. Justin, you were right. Warm, hot, cold is exactly the idea. But you need to know these 3 zones in terms of what they do. Okay? You need to be aware in terms of these 3 different zones.
Can you explain them again?
I can.
It's on page 125 too.
Thank you. So the idea in terms of zone of coagulation is about blood. Blood becomes thick, what they call viscous. Very, very thick and hard to push them out. What effect is that going to have on your patient? Well, clotting is part of it, but what else? How about the vascular system? Does it perfuse well? It doesn't. So these patients are in shock, hypovolemic shock typically, because of that. Okay? And this is both immediate burn and within the first 24 to 48 hours. What's the zone of stasis that Jessica talked about? That's next. Every time we talk about stasis, what are we talking about? Yeah, not so much homeostasis in this case.
It's just the less damage zone outside of that.
There you go. So the idea that it's just sitting there, just pulling there, it's not doing a whole lot. So you have the zone of coagulation is about blood. You have the zone of stasis, which is just kind of sitting there. And finally, you have the zone of hyperemia. And anytime we're talking about hyperemia, we're talking about this reddened area. So the burn you see is about that zone itself. All 3 together play a part in terms of talking about the acuity of the burn.
And this isn't just 1, 2, or 3 layers.
This is throughout.
This is throughout.
Right.
So you can have just a skin burn with all 3.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it said there's a full thickness, so just to germ filter, I thought it had to go all the way to 17 for full thickness.
Full thickness typically a subcutaneous area, but I don't know what they're talking about. Is it right on the edge or something like that?
Well, it says, if the zone of coagulation penetrates the dermis, the resulting injury is termed a full thickness of third-degree burn, so I thought it had to go all the way to 17.
It didn't say penetrate, it's like all the way through the dermis. It was sort of another line.
Zone of hyperemia is an unburned area surrounding the zone.
Say, that's not.
The zone of hyperemia is an unburned area surrounding the zone of stasis.
So it's still the idea in terms of being erythemic, but outside of that, there might be some untouched areas, right? But typically, right. Okay? Again, you should know these 3.
Chart on 126 in the upper corner is really good.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a couple different phases as well outside of the Jackson burn theory. Okay, there's a couple different phases. One is something that's called the hypermetabolic phase. Days or weeks, depending on the burn, increase in body's demand for nutrients begins process of repairing damaged tissue, also known as homeostasis. Okay, so the body tries to right itself in terms of whatever's going on with electrolytes and nutrients and everything else like that. Usually does a lousy job just because it's so limited based on the amount of burns, the severity of burns. There's a resolution phase. The scar tissue laid down, remodeled, rehabilitation, and returned to normal function, or so-called normal function, in terms of the ability of the body.
Are the first 2 phases important, the emergent phase and the curative phase?
Not so much so. I mentioned this before. When we have an inhalation injury, we're talking about that person taking in gases. We're talking about that person taking in whatever is within the environment that they're in. If we have somebody that's in a closed spot, a closed environment, they're most apt to be at risk for this right here. They inhale gases, perhaps heated air, flames, steam, airway, respiratory injury. So with that, the synthetic residue and plastic releases toxic gases as they burn. So everything that's off gas within that spot is what they're going to end up inhaling. As I told you this morning, the idea that it's typically not so much the heated air that's going to kill them, but more towards the rest of the junk that they're breathing in. We talked this morning about hydroxycobalamin. The idea in terms of cyanide, as I mentioned before, cyanide goes along with carbon monoxide in terms of thinking of this. You think this guy's got some problems?
Yeah.
What can you tell me about his burn?
He's gonna have airway issues, swollen
Full
face.
facial burns.
Fumes.
So he's gonna have inhalation burns.
So
Arm.
this looks to be full thickness burns right here. Probably some right here. He's got certainly some soot and the likes of on his face.
That was a BBM, right, that he had in his hand?
No doubt. Carbon monoxide, poisoning, tasteless, odorless, unrecognizable gas. Lots of different ways that we can take in carbon monoxide. Everything from wood stoves to vehicles to off-gassing in a structure fire. High suspicion, high basis of suspicion based on the time of year, the environment that they're in as a possibility. Have any of you treated carbon monoxide poisoning?
Carbon.
Transported, but, I mean, there wasn't much we could do other than IV and get them to the hospital. for
Okay.
preventative care.
Joe?
Yeah.
Yes? Were they
Um,
sick?
Yeah, it was pretty bad. They had been having the generator on for 2 days in their basement. And basically, they thought they were having, the son thought they were having a stroke.
Yep.
We were on the same call.
Is that the one we pulled out with Heidi?
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah.
How many did you end up treating?
Well, we were getting,
Three.
we had 2 that were in there, and then the son also was treated there, because he was in there doing stuff as well, but we were getting readings of 180 outside at the post. It was 460, 480, I think, inside the house.
Okay.
And actually, it ended up that the parents were unconscious, the son was up alert, moving around. After the blood gas, he actually had higher levels in his body than the parents did.
Because he was going, I think he went downstairs to the basement and all that stuff. But that
So,
was like one.
so it's nasty stuff. Airway is what you're treating for. Airway is what you're tuned into in terms of the possibilities for this. Okay?
So will oxygen take those carbon monoxide levels off?
Over a long period of time, John, we're talking about hours. Okay? I had the missed opportunity of being exposed to this years and years ago, and was living in Korea at the time. And interesting thing in terms of the way that they were venting or heating homes. So they had these cold blocks, and they were about like this, and they would fit into the floor. And they had piping then that would run vented to the outside. What they were using, this was a long time ago, what they were using at the time is tin cans, pop cans to be more exact, and they were soldering them together. And so to that, about 3 o'clock in the morning, my wife wakes up to use the bathroom, stumbles to get to the bathroom, comes back, and wakes me up, and she says, I don't feel well, I don't know what's going on. And bam, I sat up in bed, and immediately, I'm talking about within seconds, I had this headache was just debilitating. And we managed to get out into the courtyard and get exposed to air. But that headache lasted for somewhere around 12 to 14 hours before that oxygen started kicking in as far as getting rid of the carbon monoxide. So it's a slow type thing. Yeah.
Isn't definitive care for CO poisoning essentially a hyperbaric chamber?
If the numbers are severe enough, and so do any of you know about a RAD-57? You know what I'm talking about with a RAD-57?
Carbon monoxide.
Yeah, RAD-57 is kind of a fancy pulse oximeter, if you will, only it gives up carbon monoxide, or gives up CO readings. So the idea that you and I are sitting here in Spokane, we're probably sitting at a level of somewhere between 2 and 3% or so. No big deal. The idea we were to go down to LA, the idea we go to Chicago or New York City, stuff like that, we would probably live in levels of about 5%. Those that are smokers probably live in a level of about 5 to 6 to 7% on a daily basis. When you and I start taking on carbon monoxide, that level off of RAD-57 will shoot somewhere between that 5%, whatever it might be, up to 15, 20, 25% depending on. When we start talking about hyperbaric medicine, we're talking about somebody with a level above 25%. So Deaconess was using hyperbaric medicine on an emergent basis, and they stopped doing that. So really the only place to go here in the state of Washington is over in the west side.
They told us last winter that they kept flying people to Salt Lake City.
Yeah, Salt Lake City is another place with hyperbaric medicine. But I know that I don't think it's Harborview, I think it's University Hospital over there that is doing the hyperbaric medicine.
Is there a difference between an emergency hyperbaric and
Yeah,
Valley has a
yeah.
huge
So
hyperbaric?
that place is amazing. The Valley place is amazing. But what they end up doing more is wound care. So they're getting a lot of this and not having to be on call after hours for this. Pregnant patients, very much so in terms of carbon monoxide, has poor outcomes for the fetus. So yes, indeed, it's possible that you could have somebody that takes in hot air, and I don't want to dismiss that at all, but the idea that, by percentages, the idea that it's much more so on the junk that they end up breathing in versus the superheated air. So we've talked about Strider in the past month, and so last week when we got into the respiratory assessment, the idea that you heard Strider. When you start hearing Strider associated with burns, then you need to be on your high horse in terms of taking the airway now. Not tomorrow, not thinking about should I do something even though they got a GCS of 10 or 11. Should I be doing something now? Is the answer now, okay? So, succinylcholine is still the drug of choice, still the paralytic of choice for burns. But you will read, and I think we even talked about it with the profile, that's contraindicated in burns. The cutoff is somewhere around 12 hours after the burn. So, succinylcholine is still the drug of choice in a pre-hospital setting for taking somebody down.
What did you say? What, the cost of it?
Why is it contraindicated? Is that,
Potassium.
okay.
Potassium, like everything else about succinylcholine, is about potassium. So remember a couple slides ago we were talking about electrolyte imbalance. It's potassium that's going to create the electrolyte imbalance.
Okay.
That answer your question?
I'll just listen to it on there.
So I'm happy to tell you that I've never had the misfortune of having to treat these burns, although they're out there. The idea that you have somebody from Hiroshima, you have this acute thing. What's the big problem about radiation burns? Yes, the burns, but what else about it?
If you don't remove the source, it keeps burning.
Yep, there you go. So the part of it is that it will still create enough energy to continue to burn. What else about it? It will disfigure the skin without a doubt. But what else does it do? That's even worse.
More internal organ.
Say again?
More internal organ damage.
Yeah, there you go. The idea of these folks are set up for cancer. So years and years ago, I had the opportunity of visiting Kiev, Ukraine, which is about 150, 200 miles away from Chernobyl, that you may have heard about in terms of release of radiation. And so that was, when I was there, was 15 years after the accident that happened at Chernobyl, and yet you could not get any closer than 100 miles away just because of the devastation that was still taking effect 15, 20 years later. And so it's long, long, long term in terms of devastation that it does. Yes, the initial burns, but the idea that the longer term, it's going to mess with the immune system, it's going to mess with somebody else with cancer.
Isn't there a lot of issues with future children?
Absolutely,
too?
absolutely, yeah. You should know that alpha cells are very, very weak along the way. It travels only a matter of inches throughout the air. You should know that beta cells has a greater effect than alpha cells, potential for causing external as well as internal injury. You should know that gamma rays have this powerful type of ionizing radiation. The idea in terms of somebody that works in radiology on a daily basis is somewhere between beta and gamma. Have you ever seen somebody from a radiology department what they wear on their scrubs?
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Those measure the level of radiation that
So a
their body-
dosimeter that measures the amount of times they've been exposed to radiation, okay? The idea that it's a counter as far as the amount of effects of radiation.
I used to work at Inland Imaging, and I started in CT, I was pregnant at the time. So there's one for me and one for the baby.
So let me go back to this. What do you suppose you want to do in terms? What do you need in terms of alpha particles as far as protecting yourself? Very little, because it's going to move very little. So something as little as paper will block the effects of alpha rays. Beta cells, on the other hand, is where you start coming into lead protection, lead aprons, the likes of, as far as protecting yourself. So it's time, distance, and
Shielding.
there's a third one, and shielding, that's going to have an effect as far as the beta and gamma as well.
Aren't gammas harder to protect against as
Yep.
far as shielding?
Yep.
They can go through a
Yep,
lot.
just because they're so strong. Yep. So the idea in terms of contamination by dust, debris, fluids that contain small particles. So you may remember, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, that there was a tsunami. There was an earthquake in Japan. There was a tsunami that hit a nuclear reactor there, right?
Mhm.
And so there was a bunch of off gases from that thing. Okay. So what we're talking about right here is that went into the environment, and that was kind of floating over. And by the way, into the Northwest as well. If you somehow think you haven't been exposed to this, then you would be wrong. The idea that we have been exposed to it on incidents like that.
They're finding radioactive isotopes in cement.
Oh, I'm sure of that. Yeah.
We're finding so many strange cancers because of the effects of that. My grandma's Japanese, she died from a brain cancer that they had no idea how to treat just because she was in Japan at the time of the bomb.
Yeah.
She was really young and it was so aggressive. They had no idea how to treat it, and that's something that, they just said, this is probably from you being a child so close to the radiation, you don't know how to treat it.
So again, time, distance, and shielding are the 3 things that will play a part in this. What's the difference then between a Geiger counter and a dosimeter?
Geiger just reads what's being emitted, but the dosimeter actually calculates how much you're
Yeah.
actually getting.
So the idea that as a hazmat team, they're going to be carrying Geiger counters, and they might carry dosimeters as well in a hazmat type incident. That's what these will be. But the idea that that's one acute, the other one is ongoing.
Could you go back?
Yep.
Yeah. Right there. Oh, yeah, we got three over here, so. Yeah, 30 years. Oh, okay.
We used to have to wear the dosimeters on the sub, and just for going on patrol and stuff. But you'd get yelled at if you ever brought it on an airplane,
Yeah.
because you get more radiation from the sun up on that level than you would
Right.
sleeping between nuclear missiles in a reactor.
Right. Can I go?
Yes, sir.
So if you're looking for signs and symptoms, first sign is going to be this a little bit of nausea and fatigue going on. But the idea that we start getting into lethal range, the idea over a period of time, this is going to start kicking in. Okay, so you should know the differences between here and here. Chemical burn. So what's the good news, bad news about chemical burns? Because there's both.
Eliminate pretty quickly, brushing it off.
You can, for most part, you can just kind of brush it off. What's the rest of that story? Yeah, they are painful. They create that erythemic effect that we were talking about before. What else about them?
No one knows what to
Yes and no. Say again?
do. You can melt you to nothing.
Absolutely.
It is.
But does it take time for it to happen?
Depends on what it is.
So it's about the energy. It has this high energy type thing. And so what Charlie was talking about, that you can brush it off and then dilute it down, depending on what the substance is, you can get rid of it. Whereas like a thermal burn is this immediate type thing that's going to be upon you. The good news about chemical burns is that typically you can get rid of that energy by doing some fairly simple things. Okay? The bad news is, like we talked about, it continues doing its thing and working on you over a period of time. Dried chemicals should be brushed off before flushing with water. Most chemical burns can be flushed with copious amounts of water for at least 20 minutes. The idea in terms of a pre-hospital standpoint turns into very, very commonly a hazmat type operation. We're trying to do a rapid decon and then a longer decon over a period of time. We're talking about a large amount of people.
So, just a question about that, it says 20 minutes while transporting, how would you continue to flush someone with something?
You take an IV bag, you would hook it up and just run all over the person.
You wouldn't be concerned about runoff in your ambulance?
I certainly would, but it's gonna be runoff anyways. Whatever you're transporting, you end up having anyways.
Then you call out the decon and you call the soup.
I'd much rather worry about water than that specialist.
And then you're out for the rest of the day. Cause wouldn't your bus be out until, like, wouldn't you need somebody like hazmat, someone from there?
No, not necessarily. You would just need to clean it well. You need to decon it really, really well. But past that, no, not so much.
Just trying to figure out ways to get out of the system.
Yeah.
Yeah. Out of service for the next couple days.
So, check this out. There is, with chemical burns, there is this coagulation necrosis. What do you think that means?
Going back to that, what was that called?
Jackson's Law.
Yeah, going back.
Yeah, kind of like. What happens?
Coagulates to the point where it creates a barrier.
Right.
And so it kind of crusts over, turns your skin into a barrier itself.
Right. And so the idea that it would do a lot of damage before that ends up happening, but over a period of time, that's what it will do. It just kind of create a barrier for itself. I don't care that you know so much about this. Let's talk a little electrical burns. Anybody experienced or anybody ran a patient with electrical burns? Tell me something about electrical burns.
Go, they have an entrance and an exit sometimes.
Okay. Yeah, and?
Outside, the marks of the burns don't determine what can have been done inside.
Okay. What do you mean by that, Lynn?
Like the burns on the surface could look really superficial, but they could cause a
Good.
lot more, like
Excellent.
the tissue.
What else about electrical burns, please?
They're often accompanied by defib.
Yeah, so the idea, depending on the path that it goes, if it crosses the chest, the chances of the patient being in B-fib will happen, okay? What else about electrical burns?
You see it.
Yeah, depending on the path that it takes, you're absolutely right. It can be huge in terms of that. You heard about rhabdo during the past week, right?
Oh.
What's rhabdo again?
Traumatic injury of tissue.
Jerry, what'd you say?
Rapid death of muscle tissue.
Okay, so rhabdo is one of the big deals about electrical burns. Rhabdo is huge in terms of electrical burns. The idea that you have a lot of muscle tissue that's given off from electrical burn is what creates rhabdo along the way, okay? Make sure that you remember that. That's one that's probably in being your memory thing. So, then what's the difference between this high voltage and low voltage? Does it make a difference?
Yes.
How so?
More power, more damage.
Yeah, kind of like. But what's the other player here besides just the voltage itself? About the ohms, right? So the ohms and the amps play a part in terms of severity of injury. So it's not just the volts per se. That's why you can have a person that's on high tension wires sometimes surviving that versus somebody that's in-house as far as getting zapped with 110 volts.
I think kids are more susceptible to this when you put stuff in the socket.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Do we know the Ohm's law?
Nope. The idea that skin is highly resistant to electrical flow, you should know. The idea that it's a conductor for what's going on in terms of electrical burns.
But that's where the most damage usually
Yep.
is done.
Yep.
So because it's resistant, it burns.
Say again?
Because it's resistant, it burns.
Yep.
You can't tolerate the force.
One-third electrical and nearly all high voltage injuries are job related. So, shouldn't be surprised to. Although, again, like Brianna was just talking about, the idea that kids are at high risk by sticking things into outlets. think about this guy?
Super smart.
Not a problem with this at all, right?
What is there? I'm gonna guess it's not a license on that.
It's probably not.
Get a permit for that.
That's my farmer's daughter.
So most electrical injury patients die of cardiac dysrhythmia. What's the number one dysrhythmia? V-fib. V-fib. So the good news about these patients is that there is a window, there is a period in terms of finding them V-fib to where you can actually shock them back into something else. Yes, they will end up in asystole over a fairly short period of time, but if you can get to them in a short order, you actually stand a chance of actually converting them back into something else.
What's that time frame?
Time frame depends on patient to patient, but generally we're talking about somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes or so. The idea, like we've already told, the idea in terms of the so-called entrance and exit wound, the idea in terms of the passage take and everything like that, is a setup for both infection and you don't know what's going on inside the body where it's actually crossed. The longer the duration of contact, the greater the potential for injury. Duh. Electrical burn heat victims from inside out. That is the idea that once it travels through the path, it's going to be filleted. So you heard about penetrating trauma yesterday. Essentially the same thing in terms of electrical current. It's just going to open up those vessels, it's going to open up those organs in terms of wherever it comes in contact with. Lightning strikes. Yet something else is a possibility. Talk about high current electricity. The idea that, interesting thing about it, did you know that those that get struck with lightning are at 2 to 3 times risk of getting struck a second time or a third time?
Yeah.
Amazing how that works. I don't know why it is, I don't know how the science is behind it or anything else like that. But the idea is you're standing on a golf course and you get hit by electricity. There's been multiple reports about patients getting hit a second time or third time.
Like, the same.
No, years afterwards. Yeah.
It's a good way to live your life.
The duration of the electrical strike is only about 100th to 1,000th of a second. And so it's very, very quick, but it's severe in terms of the amount of electricity that's going on. And yet, these patients do fairly well in many cases. Again, you have a period, if they happen to be in V-fib, you have a period to where you can actually convert them back out of this again. So this is called spraying. All this area right here is called spraying. This is very, very typical. It's a pattern that's seen with electrical burns.
Is that the vascular or is that?
It's a vascular system, yeah.
So it's all burnt out?
Yep.
Okay.
You can have a direct strike, you can have a contact strike, or you can have a splash or ground current. Probably would be good to know. Say again, Doug?
I want to let you're the one in that stadium that gets hit.
You're in Seattle, maybe.
All right. Jerry, what was the name of the pattern?
That's just called splashing.
Splashing.
Splashing. So what's the difference then between the direct strike, the contact, the splash, and the ground current? The volts is the same. Both remain the same. It's just whether or not you're coming in direct contact with it versus a partial contact with it. So like the splash and the side flash is that you're going to come in close contact, such as what they're showing here in terms of this. While he may not get hit directly with the lightning strike, the idea that the ground around him does. And so he's going to be a conduit to that. Lightning strikes are trauma patients until proven otherwise. Lightning strikes are trauma patients until proven otherwise. Why?
Internal damage.
Yeah, what else about it though? Do you know of many patients that's still standing after a lightning strike, or what happens to them? They end up falling in terms of wherever they hit, going down. But the idea, yesterday we were talking about, you can have some severe trauma from standing position, and that's this. And with that, they can suffer fractures that goes along with that. Jessica?
Do you know a general idea of at what voltage of the electricity will it transfer from person to person?
I don't know that. So the good news is that there's only about 150, 300 people that are affected by it this year, or per year in terms of mortality. Fatality, look at this. Fatality is only about, mortality is only about 25 to 30%. That means you stand a fairly decent chance of actually being able to resuscitate these people. All right, go ahead and take a break. Take about 5 minutes, come on back, we'll finish this up.